Hi everybody. Welcome to another episode of Book Café Podcast. In today's episode, we will be talking about the book entitled The Karims, A Sporting Dynasty. And my conversation partner for this episode is Mr. Aasif Karim, the former national cricketer, as well as the former captain of the Kenyan national cricket team, as well as one of the eponymous Karims that is mentioned in the title of the book. So, what exactly is the book all about? We will, of course, get to talking about that. But just before that, if you are watching this episode on YouTube, do please be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that bell icon. It really helps us out. And if you are listening to this episode on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify, do please be certain to continue to download and support the show because we are going to have a lot more content added very soon. And in fact, it's fair to say that we have new content added all the time. But as far as this particular episode goes, let me first do my due diligence by welcoming our guest, the author himself, Mr. Aasif Karim. Hello, Aasif Bhai, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to Book Café Podcast.
Wa alaikum salam, and I look forward to this podcast.
Thank you so much, Aasif Bhai, first and foremost, for taking the time to speak to us. So we are cricket fans on the show, Aasif Bhai, and of course, you've had a distinguished career with the Kenyan national cricket team, and you also had a career in tennis as well. So we'll definitely have to talk about all of that. We also have to touch upon, because as you know that our show is based out of Dhaka, Bangladesh, we definitely have to touch upon the Kenyan rivalry with Bangladesh in the mid to late 90s as well. We will come to that as well. But before we get into all that, I just want to come back to the book itself and just ask you the pertinent question. What exactly is the book about and why did you go about publishing it? If you could just help us understand that first and foremost.
Okay, thank you very much. The book came about, really the idea came about when we were traveling to various countries, including Bangladesh, India, and several other countries, where when you would go to those countries, you would see a lot of prominence and respect given to the sports people of that country, be it posters, be it an ad in the newspaper or an ad on television. You go to the shops, you would see books on them, magazines, coverage and all that. And I was quite fascinated with that because in Kenya, this is kind of unheard of.
Right.
And so it intrigued to me that when I retire, I would like to write a book, give my experience on what happened. I thought, it would be something exciting to put a closure to my career.
Mm-hmm.
And then I learned a lot of record keeping from my late father, in the 50s and 60s when he was a huge name in Kenya. The only coverage we had was newspapers. There was no internet or there was no social media. And in those days, if your name appeared in the newspaper, I'm sure it must be the same in Bangladesh pre-social media, was a big deal. And if your photograph appeared, it was even a bigger deal.
Right.
And if there was a headline on you, was the ultimate. So, he was a huge name in Kenya. And so I followed through from youngsters to keep my record. So after I retired, I would like to do a book. Obviously, I retired and then like everything else, you say, okay, I'll do it one day. It'll happen. And it took time. Mm-hmm. And then in 2011, an Indian director visited my office here in Nairobi because his children and my children were in the same school. Mm-hmm. So because he was following on what we were doing, and Kenyan cricket was huge, in around 2000 plus. So he came and believed that there should be a sports documentary on our family because of the heritage from my, grandfather, father, myself, and now my son. So I obviously laughed it out because it was something unheard of in Kenya in those days, because in our mind, it was only for the huge names at international level. But he was very firm on that matter. And because he was a filmmaker, he believed in that story. And he felt that it would be good to do that for posterity, and it could be an inspirational story. So that's how the concept started on the documentary. And then it followed with a coffee table book. The documentary was done. It was premiered in India. My wife and myself were invited there. And that's how the whole story happened on the book. So I decided that we do a 100-year journey from the time my grandfather came to Kenya in 1926 from India to, I think the book was in 2016. So it was about 90 years of good record keeping, good information that I felt I wanted to honor my parents and my grandparents for what we had done as a family. And it was something that I felt would be a closure to my career.
Absolutely. And of course, Asif, I should take this opportunity to mention to our viewers and listeners that I have had the opportunity to watch the documentary, which you were so kind enough to point me towards. And there will, of course, be a link to that documentary as well with this episode. It will be in the description. And anybody who is watching or listening to this podcast, I would definitely say that do please check out the documentary as well. And be sure to check out the book as well, because this is a family history, a family legacy, a sporting family history, a sporting family legacy out of Kenya that really is worth reading about and watching about and listening to as well. So Asif, of course, we will deep dive more into that. And as you mentioned, your father Yusuf, from what I gather from the book as well as the documentary, that he was a titanic figure as far as the Kenyan sporting scene is concerned. So would you mind telling us a little bit more about your father Yusuf and how and just before I go any further, let me just put it in context and say that obviously your family, your ancestors came from Gujarat in India, and they migrated to East Africa. And as it goes with a lot of families from the subcontinent, that we tend to get boxed into safe careers, right? Like you become a doctor or a lawyer or any kind of a safe career. But your family has a lifelong love affair with sports. So how did that come about, and how supportive was your family with regards to pushing yourself as well as your brother and now your son Irfan towards the sporting genre? So do please walk us through that if you could. Yeah.
When my grandfather migrated in 1926, his name was Aasif Karim. And obviously, when people from India were migrating because they were ruled by a colonial, the British colony, and there were huge challenges for Indians to survive. So the people from Gujarat moved to East Africa, looking for greener pastures or good opportunities, because that was the huge thing at the turn of the century. So he was already playing what they call gully cricket in India, or just playing around. So when he came to Kenya, he encouraged his children, 6 boys, to go into sports to play. And it still baffles to me to date that when you are trying to look for food on the table, trying to survive, and here is a man who encouraged his children to play sports. And we were part of a community that had a sports club in Mombasa around those days. And so cricket was a big thing, because when you come from India or the subcontinent, you inevitably are involved in cricket in one form or the other.
Great.
So my father took it to a new level, totally. He was so committed to his sports. And he also played tennis. And at the age of 14, when he started, he managed to buy a racket from an auction at a very minimum cost, where the strings of the racket were also broken. He managed to have it fixed, and within 2 years, he became Mombasa champion at the age of 16. And he went on to remain unbeaten for 25 years, beating the colonial players, beating all those who are playing tennis. And that's phenomenal, from the age of 16, from a very challenging background, that you go on to win until the age of 42.
Yep.
So, and at that same time, he also used to play cricket at a very high level, represented Mombasa at every opportunity when a visiting side from India or Pakistan came. And he went on to play very well. Even when MCC visited in 1958, he played so well that he was immediately offered to play county cricket. But of course, in those days, it was unheard of anybody moving to England for such ventures. And so he played for the country in tennis. I think it was in 1974. And so he was a huge name in Mombasa. I mean, he was an institution, if I would call it,
Right.
Where he was he was the center of attraction, including volleyball. Volleyball, the traditional volleyball. I don't know if it's played in Bangladesh, but there was traditional volleyball that he was also the center player. So he dominated the three sport in the country and a very well respected. And obviously, when we were born, and when you're born to a home that sports features every day, you inevitably get into playing that, because you see a superstar who is your father, where people are, even meeting him was a huge novelty. If he said hello to you was a huge thing, in those days. And so his influence and my mom's support obviously helped in us continuing, and that's how we developed into the sports.
Absolutely. So it is amazing how your father managed to dominate three different sports: tennis, cricket, and volleyball. And I think that's really unprecedented, back in those days, especially for somebody who is a person of color coming from an Indian background and competing with, the British colonial masters, as well as, I'm guessing, the locals and the Indian diaspora that was in Kenya. So, which brings me to the next question, Asif Bhai. During your father's time, for those of us who haven't had the pleasure of visiting Kenya yet, during your father's time, what exactly was Kenyan society like? If I could, sort of make a comparison between apartheid South Africa or Zimbabwe under Ian Smith's regime versus Kenyan society during your dad's time. Would you say, I'm guessing that it must have been comparatively better in Kenya than it was in South Africa, apartheid South Africa, and Ian Smith's Zimbabwe. Would you agree with that?
No, it was almost similar to
Okay.
what happened in Zimbabwe and South Africa. In fact, there used to be signboards in the White Club where the signboard would say, Asians, Indians, and dogs not allowed. So you could not even if you played against them, they would have their own pavilion where your team would be sitting under the tree as a team. So it was very similar to you were treated as second-class citizen. You were just there because you are meeting their needs. That's why they're playing with you or they're playing against you. Right. And so, the racism was tremendously high. However, the one thing that did happen to him was he enjoyed a lot of respect because, he was beating them. He was a formidable player. He could bring the people together. So they would interact with him with a lot of respect and with a lot of dignity, including, in fact, I was doing the research and the stories that I got that, even the police commissioner, who was a tennis fan, so if he invited my dad to his office, he would actually receive him at the reception, which was very unusual during the colonial master, where, you're totally disrespected or, talked to at their convenience. So he enjoyed a lot of respect from the society, including the British colony.
Right. Okay. Well, that really is quite the eye opener, because I have to confess, Asif bhai, that during my reading of the book, I wasn't exactly sure what the society may have been like in comparison to the other two societies, Zimbabwe and South Africa. But I'm extremely happy to have had your answer on this for posterity, because I think that it will be a real eye opener for those of us who have sitting in Bangladesh or in this part of the world and wondering what Africa was like, East Africa was like around that time. So yes, thank you very much for putting that on the record. So obviously, your father being such a champion tennis player, that really explains why both yourself and your brother Arif also took to tennis. So if I could ask you this question, Asif bhai, to what extent was yours and your brother's tennis playing technique different from your father's? Would you say that it was quite similar, or were they markedly different? How would you answer that, if I could ask you that?
If you, look at how international sports, when you look at an icon, as a youngster, you would want to imitate, you want to emulate the way they play or they carry themselves. So obviously my father was our role model, our hero, our father. So you would want to, like any son, emulate, and follow on his footsteps. So I would say we were all on a similar style of playing. However, the difference between my dad and my brother Arif and myself, I was playing left-handed, whereas they were right-handed in tennis. So, but we were steady players. In those days, tennis was played more on a skillful. Skill was at a higher level. Power was not in those days. Because of the quality of the tennis rackets, the style of the tennis was played. If you look at the old videos, in fact, up to the late 80s, was very skill based.
Right.
But now the sport has changed in tennis so much that power has taken over. The quality of the rackets, the fiber that they use, the training that happens now, the whole dynamics have changed in the last 30 or plus years. So now it's more power, the style and finesse and the skill has taken a backseat.
Absolutely. And in fact, Asifa, you've preempted my next question, which was that given that both your father, your brother, and yourself were known as finesse players in terms of the tennis, and obviously the power game took over, and we see something similar happening with cricket as well, especially with the advent of T20 cricket, which seems to reward the power hitters more than the skilled cricketers, which is probably one of the reasons why Bangladesh doesn't really do as well with T20 as they do with maybe the ODI format, albeit they just had a terrible World Cup, but we'll get to that later. But do you feel that, we're missing out on something if the entire sport, tennis or cricket or any other bat and ball sport just gravitates more towards power and the skill level diminishes? How would you look at that? Would you say that it's a good thing or it's a bad thing? Do you lament about what's happening in both these sports? What would be your response?
Well, let me reiterate a little bit. I mean, skill is still required, but it's not as much as it was required previously, because without skill or talent, you cannot progress.
Correct.
In terms of change is inevitable. If you look at the historical of how cricket used to be played 70, 80 years ago, to the time when we played, and now it's changed. So change is inevitable. We have to accept the situation. The dynamics are different. It has its own flavor, if I could call it, in terms of how cricket is being played now. And so it's something to accept. But obviously, having transited from skill and then having a huge change to power, obviously, as an older generation, I would still prefer skill-based than power-based. But change is going to be there. And you can see the levels, not only in cricket and tennis, every sport has changed. Nowadays, even the fitness level, which was never a priority in cricket in the olden days, now it's more or less number one for your selection. If you're good, but if you're not fit, your chances of selections can be a huge question. So fitness has become a big thing. Strength has become a big thing. The quality of equipment has also changed. Remember that the bats now that are being used, or the rackets that are being used, then when you see those sixes being hit, you'd wonder. They make it look so easy, but it's the skill, the power, and the equipment that plays a very instrumental role to what we are watching.
Absolutely. And in fact, if I can just summarize this particular section, so you have to roll with the times. So if power is the way that things are going, so you have to adapt in order to survive in both the sports. Yes.
Indeed.
So absolutely. So one last question, Aasif bhai, with regards to tennis before we move on to cricket. Would you happen to have a favorite tennis player from this generation as well as yesterday's? Would be
Yes, obviously the current. The one that I enjoy watching is Novak Djokovic. What inspires me about him is the background that he comes from a war-torn country, where he was playing, or he started playing tennis in a swimming pool. Obviously without the water, but in a pool. And when you see a person coming from that background to doing wonders and really almost greatest of all times, obviously that's always a debate. But having won 23 Grand Slams, always very competitive, comes out from almost a losing position goes on to win. He's done that that many times. So it's somebody I enjoy watching. But obviously, there have been a lot of great players. But in my generation, I always enjoyed watching Jimmy Connors and John McEnroe.
Okay, Jamie. And if I could ask you to pick between the two, who did you side with more during the Connors McEnroe rivalry? Would it be Connors or McEnroe? So which one?
Well, because when I was young, I used to, kind of read and follow Jimmy Connors because he was left-handed and his backhand strokes used to be double-handed, and that's how I used to start.
Okay.
But with time, the talent that McEnroe had, he was also someone that I used to enjoy. Obviously, I was not enjoying his tantrums, but he was a huge tennis player.
Yes, and the left-hander as well. So two
Indeed, and
left-handers,
left-handed,
absolutely
yeah.
wonderful, wonderful. Okay, so that's amazing, Asif bhai. I have to confess that before reading the book, I did not know about your background in tennis at all. So I'm extremely grateful to have discovered that after having read the book and seen the documentary. So now let's move on to the next section, which is about cricket. And so obviously the first question I have to ask is, when did the transition happen from tennis to cricket, or was it always both the sports that you were playing concurrently? Do please take us through that. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. As I said, the family, my dad played cricket and tennis at a very high level. Volleyball never excited me personally, but cricket and volleyball, cricket and tennis was exciting. So it was simultaneously playing at both sides. And remember, in those days, we were playing for the passion. I had never initially thought ever that I would, let alone play the World Cup, that I would play for the country. Obviously, as a young person, you think, yeah, it'd be nice. That's ultimate for every sportsman to represent his nation. So we were playing, on passion grounds, and that kept on happening until 1991 or 92, when I had to make a serious decision, because in one of the tournaments, which was a huge tournament called Kenya Open Tennis, where I was in the finals, and that very day I had to play the semi-finals of a cricket match where I was the captain of a club match. So how do you balance the situation? And obviously, long story short, it's covered in the documentary in depth on what happened, but it became very difficult because I messed it up, because I tried to play the final because it was a huge tournament. It would always be good to win a Kenya Open. And at the same time, I'm captaining a team. We are playing the semi-finals. I tried to juggle both the things, but everything went to a disaster on that day. And at that very time, Kenya was preparing to host the Associate Trophy in 1994, where 20 countries were coming. And for the very first time, the ICC decided that they were going to take 3 teams from the associate level to play the following World Cup in 96. Until then, it was only one team. The winner of the associate trophy would be representing at the World Cup. Yeah. And so Kenyans, we had done well in Holland in 1990. We reached the semi-finals, like Bangladesh, in the 90 tournament in Holland. And so the sense of belief had become between the players and the administrators that here is a tournament that Kenya is hosting. 20 teams are participating and 3 teams are going to qualify for the World Cup. Right. So it was an important decision that the focus then my focus also went into cricket, because that was an exciting period. And secondly, I was wounded, with what happened on the tennis finals. And the disappointing part, and of course, I'm taking the full responsibility on that, is that the following month we were to play a Davis Cup match against Romania. Now, having done well to have reached the final, and then you're not even invited to be in the squad. So multiple of those things that happened, but that's again another story. So that's how then I more or less went into cricket, and I still have my regrets, because I was only 29 when I almost gave up tennis. I could have easily played for another 5-6 years at a very high level, but destiny had something else for me.
Yes, absolutely, and it is quite interesting how the politics can kind of derail a promising career. And of course, in the current context, with regards to Bangladesh and the 2023 World Cup, I can just say, with regards to the fans here, it was a lot of the behind the scenes politics that kind of derailed the whole campaign. But we'll come back to Bangladesh later on, Asif bhai. But coming back to the 1994 ICC Trophy, which of course, as you mentioned, is the qualifying tournament for the ODI World Cup. Is it fair to say that 1994 was also the time that the rivalry between Kenya and Bangladesh properly began? Because as far as my memory goes, in the last match between Kenya and Bangladesh in 1994, Kenya beat Bangladesh by 13 runs, and you actually took 3 wickets in that game in 9 overs for 55 runs. So would you say that that could be the starting point of the intense rivalry that we got to see between Kenya and Bangladesh in the early and late 90s?
Yeah, I would say that kind of was the peak point, because both the countries felt that they were at par,
Right.
but until then, the history that I have is Bangladesh visited Kenya in 1984 or 85, the first time, and Kenya dominated that the 3-day match and the 1-day match. But until 94, Kenya never beat Bangladesh in an ICC tournament. I remember playing my first associate trophy in 1986, and we had Bangladesh on the ropes.
Right.
It was a 60-over match. It was a low scoring. I think that they got about 143 or something, if my memory serves me right. And we lost the match by 10 runs. My friend Atar Ali Khan was also playing in that time. And then we played them in 90. Again, we lost to them in Holland. Right. So the first victory, and a very critical victory, because Bangladesh came to Kenya as one of the hot favorites, at least to qualify, right. For if not win the tournament. So that was a huge blow, because Mohinder Ramanath was their coach. Right. And proved with so much of wealth of experience, and the team that you had, with Nannu, Atar, Bulbul. I'm trying to remember the name of the captain then.
Farooq Ahmed. Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, the first wicket partnership, chasing 295, was almost 150 runs between Farooq and I think Bulbul. And so we, when scored 295 in 50 overs, at lunch break, we were quite confident that this game should be in the pocket. And I remember Shamim Chaudhry, who had come to do the radio commentary. He was commentating live in those days to Bangladesh, because there was a huge following in Bangladesh. And at lunchtime, we bumped into him and said, Asif, this game's gone for us. And you could feel the pain in what he was saying. But the table stand. I mean, it was up to when it reached to 43rd or 44th over, it looked like Bangladesh will get the score. And I came in and I got 2 very critical wickets. One was Moni, who can get you quick runs. And again, I can't remember I think whether it was Farooq or whose wicket I got, and the game changed again. But it was very close, too close for comfort. But that belief between the 2 countries cemented that these are the next two teams that could be a serious rivalry, like Australia, England, or Pakistan, India.
Okay, yes, absolutely. And in fact, I was just checking the score, Asif bhai, and I believe you got Farooq Ahmed, Enamul Haq, and there was one more. Oh, you got Minhajul Abidin Nannu. So Nannu.
Yeah, on the last delivery.
Yes,
Nannu.
you did.
Yeah.
Yes, you did. Okay, amazing. So 3 for 55 in 9 overs. So yes, you definitely broke a lot of Bangladeshi hearts that day, but obviously that's totally fine, because I believe that we really Bangladesh cricket at that time really needed that kick up the pants, because I think that because the World Cup was going to be hosted in the subcontinent, so I think that fans were actually hoping that because India, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka are hosting, maybe they might decide to give 1 or 2 matches in Dhaka. But that's an unturned stone that maybe in another lifetime, we could always revisit it. So Bangladesh had to wait another 15 years until the 2011 World Cup. But I am getting ahead of myself, Asif. So let me just come back to the consequences of the 1994 ICC trophy. So obviously Kenya came second to UAE in that tournament, but because they'd already come out second and there were three places available, so Kenya managed to get to the 1996 World Cup. And so coming to Kenya's first official ODI against India in that particular World Cup, I just have to ask you this one question. You bowled a peach of a delivery to Sachin Tendulkar when he was on 99. Sachin played forward, and the ball hit him on his pads. But there was also a catch to forward. I think it was just in front of the batter, silly mid off, if I'm not mistaken, or silly point. And everybody went up to appeal for the catch as well as the LBW, but the umpire didn't give either of them out. How on earth did that ever happen? And what were your thoughts when you were living through that moment? Please walk us through that.
Well, obviously, it was a very critical moment for Kenya as well as for Sachin, because Sachin was getting his first 100 in a World Cup.
Right.
He had never scored 100. And we were very confident. We had put a lot of pressure on him. In fact, that entire over, he couldn't get a run. And obviously, if the DRS was there, I would not even have asked the captain, and I would have just gone with that. And I think it was a very obvious decision. But it's part and parcel of cricket, where you take it in the stride with what it comes. Obviously, it would have been another feather in the cap to get a stalwart of such a caliber cricketer. It was disappointing, but as I said, sports people, you take it in the strides that we have. But yes, if you ask me, was he out? 100% he was out.
Absolutely. And if memory serves me right, I believe in the post-match presentation, Sachin actually admitted that he did not nick the ball. So if he didn't nick it, so obviously the ball was only going to crash onto the stump. So,
well, either way, because if he didn't nick it, it was going to the stumps.
It was going to hit the stumps.
If he did nick it, then he was caught.
Exactly. It was exactly what you said. So a double whammy that Sachin was very, fortunate to have escaped. But, so moving on from that particular game, Asif bhai, let's talk about the other amazing feat that happened during that World Cup. I am, of course, talking about that fantastic victory over the double world champions, the West Indies, where Kenya was all out for 166 and then came roaring back to get the West Indies all out for just 93 runs. At what point during that match did you feel that, yes, we have a chance to win it? You please tell us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, when we were at the dressing room before going to take the field after scoring 166, obviously we had just come the day before to Pune. And as cricketers in those days, you obviously want to play the best that you can, but you're also a tourist, so you also want to see the town and see where you're traveling. It's not very often that people get that opportunity. So we were joking around at the lunchtime to say, how many overs will these guys finish the score with? And so everybody gave different numbers, 30, 25, it was just random round numbers. So fine, as we got onto the field, and I think the moment we got Lara, I mean, the first wicket we got Richardson, right. Rajab bowled beautifully well, and Martin Suji.
Yeah.
When we got those 2 wickets, we felt, okay, it's good. We don't want to lose in a bad manner, because one of the goals we had was that even if we were to lose, because we were expected to lose all the matches, but we would like to lose with dignity and being competitive.
Correct.
So we would be happy that if we got 4 or 5 wickets, in that match against West Indies, we would have done well.
Yeah.
But the moment we got Lara, it took a complete shift in the team, and all of a sudden we got together and said, no, this is a great opportunity. Let's push this, and let's put the necessary pressure and take some radical decisions on the field in terms of field placing, in terms of putting the pressure on. And Kenyans traditionally are very good. If you open a door, we will sneak in.
Right.
And we put a lot of pressure, on them. I mean, the bowlers did a great job. The fielding was, everything went up, in terms of the levels of fielding, the bowling, the cheering, the support with one another, and they started crumbling.
Mm-hmm.
And they crumbled so badly that you would wonder, is this really the great West Indian team?
Yes.
And as I said, the rest was history. We had a fantastic win. It's something that's been talked about even as you're putting it now. It was a huge thing. All of a sudden, everybody started wondering, where is Kenya? Who is Kenya? What cricket do they play? Because we appeared in all international media, including in those days, CNN was a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
So it became a huge story. And obviously in India, as you know, the coverage was phenomenal, that we became what we call instant heroes. And so the sense of belief kept growing from our first match when we played India in Qatar.
Mm-hmm.
That we were competitive in that match. We went to play Australia. We were very competitive against them. And so the sense of belief was there. And then we got this opportunity to hit West Indies, and the rest was history.
Yes, and absolutely. And as you say, the rest was history. And in fact, I should take this opportunity to remind our audience that the West Indies actually went on to become semi-finalists in that particular tournament. So it was absolutely not it was no mean achievement at all. It was a phenomenal achievement by the Kenyan team to have gotten them on the ropes and then knocked them out. So as a neutral fan, I absolutely enjoyed that match. I have to say it's one of the enduring memories that I have of that 1996 World Cup. So yes, thank you so much, Aasif, for sharing those memories with us. Okay, so moving on, Aasif, from the 1996 World Cup, again, let's go to 1997, and again, there's another ICC tournament that's a trophy tournament that's happening, and this time Kenya and Bangladesh actually found themselves in the finals of that tournament, and my memories of that particular final, we weren't watching it live on television. It wasn't being broadcast, but we were listening to it on the radio. And all I could remember was a belligerent Steve Ticolo smashing the bowlers all over the park to score an amazing 147 runs. And the second, highest score, I believe, was Maurice Odumbe's 43. And the end score by Kenya was 241. Looking back at that score in hindsight, do you feel that 241 was enough on that particular day? Do please share your thoughts on that.
On those conditions, 241 was more than enough. It was, it was a winning score. But
Right.
what happened is that it rained.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the game had to go to the next day. Again, it rained in the morning. And so the question was whether this match will be played or not. It was a debate and was left to the captains to decide where they would reduce then to 20 overs, in those days. And so the management and the captains with the referee and the umpires decided to continue the play because everybody wanted to see. What amazed me was the entire ground was packed with Bangladeshi supporters. So I was asking myself, are we playing in Bangladesh or are we playing in Malaysia? But the love and the support, that's another subject. The passion that the Bangladeshis have for their cricket is fantastic. I would equate it to India and Pakistan. So anyway, they had to score 166 in 20 overs. Now the game went to the last delivery. Bangladesh, I must give credit because it was still not an easy score to get 166 because we had a good bowling attack, a good field placing, good fielding team. And so for them to get those runs, they would really have to play extraordinarily well. And I remember they even changed the batting lineup and they sent Nanu to open the innings,
right.
Which normally is not the case.
Right.
He's your anchor, number 3, number 4. He was always your rock solid to hold the inning. So that was the first change that they made and sent him. And they went aggressive from the beginning. And of course, wickets were falling when you take chances. And so the game was tilting up and down up to the last over where they needed 11 runs. Mm-hmm. And again, getting 11 runs in the last over was not an easy task.
No.
And hitting a 6 straight was not possible in those conditions. Right. And I think it was Pilot. Was it Pilot
yes, it was Pilot.
batting?
Yes. Yes.
And
That's
Martin,
correct.
it was a debate between whether I should bowl that last over or Martin Suji. So we had a consensus as a senior cricketers, and people felt, well, let Martin take the over because it's 11 runs and we don't take any chances. And the first ball, Pilot hits a straight six, which even shook us up. And so I must give credit to Bangladesh. And then when it came to the last ball, it's a very funny story because on the scoreboard it says target 166.
Correct.
Now we have played cricket in Kenya where when the score is written 166, it means 166 is to tie.
Right.
And 167 is to win. So when we looked at the score, it was 165. Right. So we're thinking they need 2 runs in the last ball. So even if we worst case scenario, we make sure that they get 1 run so that the game is tied. That's the worst situation for us. And I think there were 8 wickets down.
They were, yes. And
so Martin comes in, bowls, gets on a leg by. The fielder is right there, throws the ball, doesn't get him run out. So 1 run.
1 run.
And we say, okay, well, disappointing, but we have tied the game. And then you all of a sudden see there is screaming and celebrations from Bangladesh. And for a minute, we got confused.
I see.
As a team.
Right.
And I mean, it's a disappointing anecdote for us.
Right.
And then to realize that no, 166 was the
target. I see.
And of course, the celebrations that Bangladesh had was phenomenal. I mean, an aircraft was sent that night. I think Prime Minister Hasina.
Yes.
Yes. He was the Prime Minister then. They were received, with huge support at the airport, taken around the city, and of course, well-deserved victory for Bangladesh.
For sure. And in fact, Aasif bhai, you've helped to answer a 26-year-old puzzle that we as cricket fans in Bangladesh were always wondering, that with 1 run to win, why didn't Maurice Odumbe bring the field in to cut off that single? So this particular anecdote, this story, I did not know about, and I think a lot of fans here didn't know about that either, that there was that confusion with regards to the target. And in fact, I should also point out to our viewers and listeners that because it was a rain-affected match and 166 was the target in 25 overs, if Bangladesh had gotten 165 instead of 160, it wouldn't have been a tied match. Kenya would have won. So I think that in hindsight, it really helps to explain a lot about what happened on that day. And of course, as you rightly mentioned, that Bangladesh played out of their skins for those 25 overs. But if they had gone on for the full 50 overs, who knows? I believe that Kenya would definitely have come out as the winner on that particular day. And in fact, Aasif, I want to remind you about something that I believe you said after that match, that when there was a return series with Bangladesh, I can't seem to remember which series it was, but I do remember reading in the papers that you went on record as saying that we're going to show Bangladesh that if it wasn't for rain, they would never have beaten us on that day. And then right after that, I open the newspaper and I see that Deepak Chudasama has scored 122 runs and Kennedy Otieno has scored 144. And I was like, oh gosh, the whole Kenyan team must have been very upset about that loss. So they've come back all guns blazing. So could you tell us a bit about that particular match?
What happened is that, remember, after the 97 ICC trophy, the ICC, and I think it was good lobbying by Mr. Ashraful from Bangladesh and our administrators to see how they could create these two upcoming nations to get more opportunities at a higher level. And then there was the first time when ICC started what we call the ODI status, the one-day international status. And Bangladesh and Kenya were the first 2 teams to be given that status, where it meant that we would get automatic entry to the World Cup and get more opportunities with the test playing nation. Right. And so obviously after getting that status, the important thing was to have some matches. And so the first series arranged was in Kenya, between Kenya, Bangladesh, and Zimbabwe. Right. And the first match was between Kenya and Bangladesh. And obviously that loss was still hurting us. Right. It was if I have to call it one of my most disappointing, of course, I was happy for Bangladesh because my first visit in Bangladesh was 1995, and I felt very attached and love with the country, with the people, with the passion that they had and the respect that I enjoyed. I'm to date have a lot of attachment with Bangladesh, and so we were disappointed. And so obviously now that we got the one-day status, we are playing at home. We had a good team, and so we were determined to do well. Not because we were playing Bangladesh, but we wanted to do well. And so obviously the start of the series was very important. And I think we scored, I think, well over 300 in that match. And we dominated that match. And in fact, that entire, we beat Bangladesh twice,
yes.
in that series, and we lost to Zimbabwe in the final. So yes, we had a good win, a convincing win. But it was not to prove that we are better than Bangladesh, but as you rightly used the word, the rivalry in a very progressive manner was very competitive on the ground. But we had excellent relationships to date with most of the players that I played with outside the ground. I mean, whether you talk about Bulbul, whether you talk about Nannu, whether you talk about Atar Ali Khan, you talk about Moni. I mean, even when I visited Bangladesh in 2006 to do commentating, we had wonderful comradeship, where we would, go out for meals and reminisce those good old days.
Wonderful. And it just goes to show that cricket is a sport that unites everybody. And I'm extremely pleased to hear, Asif Bhai, that you still maintain those good relations with the Bangladeshi players and vice versa. So it really is amazing to hear. Okay, so just moving on from 1997, Asif Bhai, I just want to very briefly touch upon another Tri-Nation tournament that took place this time in India, where India invited Kenya and Bangladesh to play in India. Back in those days, that's 25 years to the day, and that's probably something that Bangladesh doesn't get invited to play in India at all these days, I don't think. But back in those days, it must have been quite an amazing opportunity to be playing in front of an Indian crowd. So, what are some of your memories from that particular tournament? Keeping in mind that Bangladesh also, I should just point it out to my audience that Bangladesh got their first ever win in ODI cricket against Kenya in that first match. But then Kenya bounced back to win the second match, as well as defeating India in one of the matches before meeting India in the final. So do please share some of your memories of that particular tournament.
Yeah, that tournament was played in the peak summer of India. It was May 1998. Right. It was known as Coca-Cola Trophy. And we were playing Bangladesh, the first match in Hyderabad. Again, a very close match, but that was Bangladesh's first ODI victory. With Akram, I think was the captain on that tour. Was a good match, and then we played them in Madras, in Chennai. Again, a very close contest where I think we got away in a very close encounter to stay into the tournament. So, as you rightly said, the rivalry was getting intense as far as cricket was concerned, and so we had some excellent matches. Very competitive, and it was good for both the young nation that we got that opportunity. We didn't mind. It was very hot, but as Kenyans, we were fit. We were hungry to play cricket, so we didn't mind, irrespective of the weather. Then we beat India. I mean, that was our second major win at that time, Gwalior. And I remember when I went to toss the coin with Azhar, I mean, it was 54 degrees at the center. I mean, that is hot. But what baffled me most in the entire series was the Indian crowd packed in that heat. Right. I mean, that stadium, I think, had a capacity of about 20,000 or so. It was fully packed in 54 degrees, and it was amazing. I mean, it was such a huge thing, and it was very important for us to stay in that tournament, and it was important that we beat Bangladesh in Chennai. And then when we beat India in Gwalior, we secured the position to be in the finals, which again is a dream for many cricketers to play at Eden Gardens.
Yes, absolutely, and that was one of the tournaments which I personally enjoyed a lot because of the fact that Bangladesh got that monkey off their back with the first win. But my goodness, Kenya was such an amazing side, and the giant killers of that era, I have to say. West Indies first, India second, so it really was amazing. So coming to the next year, Asif, the 1999 World Cup, obviously you were made the captain of the national team before they took off for England. And it wasn't the happiest of campaigns because it was probably one of the lower points in Kenya. And we won't dwell too much on it, but I just wanted to touch upon one thing that by this time in 1999, after the tournament, you decided to tender your resignation from the captaincy as well as retiring from cricket. In hindsight, do you feel that that was the best decision to have made, keeping your business commitments and your family in mind? Or if you could go back and have a do-over, would you have, decided to continue? So, what would be your take on that? So, if you help us.
Very good question. First of all, I think there's a misconception that unless you win, then it's regarded that you've had a successful tournament. Remember, Kenya was a young nation in cricketing terms. We were going to play in England, where 90% of our players had never, let alone play cricket in England, had never even visited England. So the first mistake, or what we should have done, was to have a tour the year before for players to get acclimatized the conditions to play in England. It's not very easy to play in England. Remember, our strength was our bowling spin attack, where we would rely on 30 plus overs on our spin attack. And so when we were playing in England, it was late spring, I would say, not even early summer. It was extremely cold, where you could not even hold the ball. It was so tough. Right. But if you look at the results that we had, we were very competitive in almost all the matches. In fact, our management at the end mentioned that we scored more runs in the 99 World Cup than we did in the 96 World Cup. So for me, I would not regard that as a unsuccessful trip. But we were competitive and we were making a mark. To do well in cricket, it's a process. We are a young cricketing nation. We are playing against the top of the top with all the experience that they had. So we were in a building process, and that process required us to lose to learn also, so that you don't get complacent on that. So there was a lot of learning to be done. There was a lot of work to be done. And so that's as far as that issue was concerned. When we got back, and as you rightly say, the politics came in, the finger started pointing at the captain. Right. We didn't win a match, and so, and all that stuff. So I sensed that the situation was quite toxic in the environment and I'd already played 20 years for the country. Right. And so I felt it's better that I come out gracefully instead of bringing politics and coming out on a very bitter note externally. Internally, I was very disappointed because, as you hinted, I should not have retired. At that very stage, the team required my leadership. Right. We were a young cricketing nation, and they needed somebody sober because after I retired, there were several problems for them to bring me back. I'm sure you have a question for me on that. Yeah. So, on hindsight, if the situation was reversed, I would have been better placed to continue another couple of years to stabilize and create a good pathway for the next generation to take over. So that decision was quite painful, obviously, but sometimes you have to make those decisions. And again, I had a young family also, and there was no money coming from cricket. We had to work all day, and evenings you would go and play your cricket. So having discussed with the family and having gone through so much, and as I said, ultimate was to play for the country, to play for the World Cup, and I captained the national team in the World Cup. So, all the boxes were ticked, those things are concerned. So then we decided it's better I come out and people should ask, why did you retire? Instead of when are you retiring? That one word changes the whole meaning. So I'm glad that you're asking me that question, because in your own assessment, I should not have retired. The question is, why did you retire? I hope I've answered you.
Absolutely, and in fact, I completely agree with you, Asif bhai, that I think Kenyan cricket really needed you at that time. When I look back at that particular period, and exactly as you said, that just because the campaign is winless doesn't mean that it was unsuccessful. And if the powers that be who were behind the Kenyan Cricket Board had actually had the foresight to see that you were actually needed at that pivotal moment, that who knows what may have happened, and the destiny of Kenyan cricket could have probably changed in that instance. But
In
in fact,
fact, just to add something, there was a major debate within the administration.
right,
When I decided that I'm going to give a press conference and announce my retirement,
right,
I had a lot of pressure not to do that by senior members of the board. But there was no clarity on the way forward, and I don't like that. So
right,
I said, no, it's better, even though it's painful. I'm giving up something that has been with me for 20 years, and I'm just giving it up because of the politics. So the emotions were quite high at that stage, and that was the best decision felt at that very
at
time
that time.
by myself and my family.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in fact, just staying with 1999, Asif bhai, and leading up to the year 2000. So I just want to put something else in context, and this is a question which has been on my mind for a very long time, and that is Bangladesh, in contrast, had a reasonably successful campaign in the sense that they had an opportunity to play against Scotland during that World Cup, and so that was the main target that Bangladesh had. But the added bonus that they also got was that they also managed to beat Pakistan. And that particular win against Pakistan seems to have changed a lot of opinions in the ICC or the powers that be, that yes, now Bangladesh is ready to gain test status. Albeit, if I were to look back at that period, honestly, I would say that Kenya was as deserving as Bangladesh, or in fact even more deserving. And Gordon Greenwich had gone on record as saying that Bangladesh is still miles away from Test cricket, and I believe that he's been proved right in many ways. So when that decision took place to grant Bangladesh Test status, as a Kenyan player and as administrators with Kenyan cricket, was there any kind of slight or resentment felt by Kenyan cricket that they stole a march on us, or maybe we were also as deserving as Bangladesh, or they could have at least elevated both countries to test status together? What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, to be very honest, in my view, Bangladesh deserved more than us for various reasons. Kenya was not ready. We were non-starters, if I have to be very honest with ourselves, because the national team was doing well as far as one-day cricket was concerned. But when you're talking about test cricket, that means you must have a good development, solid structure to bring up the players from the under 11s to the 13s to the 15s. That becomes a system. You have an A team, and then you must have a longer version of cricket played in the country. Now, I know Bangladesh had the 3-day cricket going on and the 4-day cricket going on, and the cricket was spreading far and wide. Mm-hmm. And as far as Kenyan cricket was concerned, there was nothing much happening other than the focus on the national team. So when you look at the results of the national team only on the 1-day, then obviously everybody would say Kenya should have been given the test status. But we need to be honest. Were we ready for it? No. We had a lot of work to do because we had no longer version of cricket. We never played 2-day cricket or 3-day cricket or 4-day cricket. Mm-hmm. So how are you going to sustain at the test level when you don't have the competency, you don't have the infrastructure for the longer version of the game? Secondly, I think it is unfair to keep blaming Bangladesh to have not done well in test. Let me remind you the history. When the West Indies got their test status, it was in the 1930s. Right. They struggled for a number of years. Mm-hmm. India, when it got its test status, I think in the 50s, they also struggled. When you look at all these powerhouses, including Sri Lanka, right, when they got the status in 1979-80, it takes 15, 20 years for you to make something solid. Because remember, it's like putting somebody from high school straight to a university on the third or fourth year straight away. So
Right.
obviously it will have its challenges. And of course, Bangladesh went through those challenges. Of course, you have your own other problems, politics, and so many other issues, and that needs to be addressed on its own. But at that stage, to answer your question, it was fair for Bangladesh to get that opportunity. They've done quite well as far as home series are concerned. They need to work on their away series, but it's a process. It's not an instant result where people are expecting that the moment you get test status that you are going to do wonders. It's not possible.
Absolutely. And I do thank you for that, Asif bhai, because I think that when it comes to the critics of Bangladesh cricket saying that they've not done well at all, your passionate defense of Bangladesh and the test status will come as a fresh breeze to all of us who have been debating with ourselves or internalized this, that yes, maybe the team is just not good enough. But yes, I do thank you for that, and I'm sure that a lot of fans in Bangladesh will be very heartened by your passionate defense of Bangladesh cricket and Test cricket in particular. And just jumping ahead, Asif bhai, to the 2003 World Cup, I obviously we cannot have this episode without talking about that phenomenal 2003 World Cup, which was hosted by Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Kenya, and where Kenya managed to go to all the way up to the semifinals of that particular World Cup. And of course, I have to also mention that you were brought back right in the nick of time to become a part of the team to add your wealth of experience to the class of 2003. So tell us about your thoughts on that and memories of that particular campaign. How did it all start out for Kenya in that tournament, and what exactly was the goal at the start of the tournament versus where you ended up, which is the semifinals? You walk us through.
Well, as we touched on it, that when I retired in '99, the board, as I said earlier, some felt that I should now exit, and of course I exited. But there was a problem started, because when you are playing in a team and when you're leading a team, it's two different ballgame. And when you're leading a team at the international level, it's even a tougher situation because you are always on the receiving end, you're always on the defense because the big boys are at you all the time. So there was a lot of acrimony, problems in the team, within the administration. And so just before the World Cup, we had a tour to Zimbabwe, which was a disaster, where there were a lot of accusations, and the board felt that we're heading to a World Cup and we need to go back on the drawing board to see how we can salvage in what was going to be a disaster. And so that's how one of the reasons is why I was recalled, because they needed some sobriety or some sense to prevail, and also to put a check and balance on some of the dogmatic cricketers that we had in the team. And one of the major issues that not many know is that there was mutiny in the team where the players had threatened to boycott to play for the World Cup if they were not paid and some other conditions that they had placed. So there was a worrying factor because remember, Kenyan cricket was growing. So it cannot afford at international level not to participate in a World Cup or to create a drama and create a bad image for themselves and for the administration. So they had to really bite their tongue, to come back, the same board to come back to me. But, so I was also debating because I really had not played any competitive cricket, it was social cricket. So to play the last World Cup in '99 and then come straight to the next World Cup, I think that might be a record on its own for a cricketer to play one cup and straight to the next World Cup. I'm not sure if any other cricketer, maybe in Bangladesh, but I don't think there is any other cricketer who has done that. So my first task was to speak to the team and explain to them the situation of where the board is, what are the challenges they are having, and to try and bring sense. The sense must prevail that the cause is greater than our individual needs.
Absolutely.
So I had a long discussion with the team. It was very difficult because remember, I'm coming back to the team 4 years later, not sure how I'll be received. whether I'll still, because I was a very formidable character, as a member. So how will they receive me? Will they be comfortable, uncomfortable? So, but because I was already split in the team, so a lot of things needed to be ironed out. So I had a long discussion and explained to them. And by the time I finished the explanation, who was the captain, was ready with everybody to sign. He just tore the paper, and that was the end of it. And so the focus came back to cricket, that we are representing the country. The World Cup is greater than any of us. The sport is greater than any of us. And a World Cup is a World Cup. I mean, there are thousands of professional cricketers who have not played a World Cup, yet they're professional. So we are few fortunate to go into the World Cup, and how can we let this go? So we started the campaign. We had a bad start against South Africa. We beat Canada, and then we came back to Kenya to play Sri Lanka. And that, I feel, was the turning point when we beat them in a capacity crowd at Nairobi Gymkhana, and beating also the former world champions, in good fashion. So again, the sense of belief came. Everybody wanted to do well as individuals, and if everybody wants to do well, then as a team, obviously you are going to do well. We go back and we face our rivals, Bangladesh, in Joburg, and we beat them, in a convincing fashion. So that was our second test playing team that we beat. So we qualified for the second round, where I think it was Super 6, is what they were calling in those days. And so we carried the points. So we needed one win in the Super 6 to get to the semi-finals. And in the Super 6, we had India, we had Zimbabwe, and Australia. Obviously, we were targeting Zimbabwe to win that. And we had a very close encounter against India, very, very close match. And then we, I would say, thrashed Zimbabwe to get to the semi-finals. And so that's how the journey went to where we reached.
Absolutely. And it's been, and we're recording this episode in the middle of the 2023 World Cup. It has been 20 years since that amazing run that Kenya has had, all the way up to the semifinals of the ODI World Cup in 2003. And in fact, there's just one more question that I had, Asif Bhai, and that is with regards to your personal man of the, performance in the match against Australia. And at one point, I believe you had taken a bunch of wickets without giving away a single run. And because of that, you were given the man of the match award in that match against Australia. So it must have felt extremely special to have won such a prestigious prize in a World Cup. So what were your memories of that?
Of course, we were, when I came to bowl, the Australians were 109 for 2 of 15. So they needed about another 50 or 60 runs. So it was more like going through motions. But the moment I bowled first to second ball to Ponting and I see him struggling, I changed my mode completely. I said to myself, no, I believe in myself. Even if they need 10 runs, they need to get those 10 runs. So I was very focused on every delivery that I bowled. And of course, getting him was a huge, huge wicket. And as you rightly said, by the time I bowled my first 2 overs, I had 3 wickets for 0 runs. At one stage, I bowled 8 overs, 6 maidens, 2 runs, and 3 wickets. So even at one stage, when I was looking at the scoreboard at the end of the over, I was like asking myself, is there a mistake or something in the scoreboard? And then even after the match, to be given the man of the match, I could not give a better closure to my 23-year career to get a man of the match against what is regarded as one of the best one-day Australian team in the history of Australian cricket.
For sure. And of course, I have to say that, thrashing Zimbabwe, thrashing Sri Lanka, who also went on to become semi-finalists in that particular tournament. So there must be something, a connection between losing to Kenya and making it to the semi-finals, because the West Indies did the exact same thing in 1996. But yes, as you rightly said, Asif Bhai, that particular tournament, I'm sure that any neutral fan or a lover of cricket must have been cheering for Kenya throughout that tournament, because it was such a fabulous run. And of course, you etched your name into history along with the class of 2003, by going all the way there. to the semifinals. So, Aasif, I just have to say that at this point in time, I have pretty much exhausted all of my questions for this episode. But before we let you go, I have a couple of surprise guest questions for you. And so, with
Okay.
your permission, I would like to just read out a couple of them. So the first guest question that we have for you is from somebody whom you know very well, and he is, in fact, Mr. Athar Ali Khan, your friend and rival
Yeah.
from Bangladesh. So let me just read out the question that Athar Bhai has given. And so the question from him is, dear Asif Bhai, everyone expected Kenya to go from strength to strength after their sensational win versus West Indies in the 1996 World Cup. But what actually happened? Has the concerned authority made any serious attempts to develop the cricket infrastructure in Kenya? Do you see any chance whatsoever for Kenya to make a comeback in terms of a good cricketing nation? So yeah.
First of all, much appreciated for Atta to pose this question. And I'm actually following him on his commentating work that he does, a very good job that he does, and he seems to be really enjoying it. Which in fact I shared once with him in the commentary box when I visited Bangladesh when Kenya was playing. I think it was 2006 or something. But coming to Kenyan cricket, it's a very sorry state. And I had said this long time ago in one of my interviews with ESPN Cricket Info that Kenyan cricket is dead and buried. It's very painful for me to say that, but that's the harsh reality. We have no quality development structure. We have no competitive cricket. We have no A team. If you look at the fixtures that the national team have, is nothing of significant. We are now in Division 3 at international level. So a team that had reached the ODI status, knocking the door for Test status, reaching the semi-finals of the World Cup has now gone so below that it might even become an affiliate country in time. The interest has dwindled. People are very, very upset with the whole situation. And to answer the question, I see no hope, no future for Kenyan cricket to go back to the level we had reached.
Okay, well, that is quite an eye-opener, and obviously a lot of fans on this side of the world will obviously be very disappointed to hear that as well, Asif bhai. But if I could just go back in time 20 years back, Asif bhai, I can't remember if it was right after the 2003 World Cup or maybe it was in between the 99 and 2003 World Cup. Where in one of your interviews, if I remember correctly, you mentioned that Kenyan cricket was not getting as much support from the government. So was that actually the case back then? Is it still the case now that maybe government support could have probably tilted the balance towards reviving Kenyan cricket, but that's just not happening? Would you say that that's the case? Or
I said that we don't have the government support. Then the idea then was for us to spread the game around the country because it was focused on one city or two cities.
right,
But if you want to go to the test status level and you want to make it an impactful sport, the game must spread far and wide.
right,
Be it schools, be it the estates, be it the towns, and there must be facilities created because how else are you going to bring the cricketers? They're not just going to spring from the sky. So that was the support that I was talking was lacking. Now the damage is so deep that any form of support at this stage is going to take a very long time if appropriate support is given, appropriate administrators are running it, competent people are brought in. Then it's a long process if you want to reach that level. And remember, a lot of the associate countries now are very powerful. I mean, during the time of Bangladesh and Kenya in the 90s, we never even heard of Afghanistan playing cricket.
right,
You never heard of Oman playing cricket. You never heard of Saudi playing cricket or Nepal playing in any substance. Now you see all these nations are up their level of cricket. They've grown, and Kenya has gone further down. So it's going to be a toll road for us to come back.
Okay. And yeah, of course, as I mentioned, that it is disheartening at this point in time, but with a lot of thoughts, prayers, and good governance. Who knows? At some point in the future, we will, of course, all hope as cricket fans that Kenyan cricket will find their way back to top level, top tier cricket. So, Asif, I mentioned that I have a couple of surprise guest questions. So, do please bear with me because I have a few more to go through. In your last answer, you mentioned ESPN Cricket Info and the commentary you did with Athar Ali Khan. And so my next question is actually from somebody who works with ESPN Cricket Info, and his name is Mr. Mohammed Isam. He's the Bangladesh correspondent for ESPN Cricket Info, and he's also the author of the book On the Tiger's Trail. And Isam is a friend of the show. He's also recorded an episode with us. And his question to you is, Dear Asif Bhai, please tell us a bit about Kenyan cricket's connection with families because as far as my knowledge goes, it's a small community that plays cricket there. So what was it like having so many families contributing to cricket in Kenya? So I think that's an amazing question. So a great question.
Yeah, cricket was played in Kenya with private clubs. 100 years ago, when the British colony were ruling the country, they allocated land to different communities, so who had their own cricket clubs. And so the people who lived around the club, the locals, started going into the clubs and started playing with maize cob and the cricket balls, and they got opportunity. And so that's how you see the 3-4 families that are part of the Kenyan, the Odumbes, the Tikolos, Sujis, the Obuyas. Those were the main families that played cricket. And that's how the few families that you hear about, purely because they were living in the neighborhood of those cricket grounds.
Of those grades. Okay, that's very, very interesting. And in fact, I should also mention that your brother Arif, of course, played both tennis and cricket. And I believe that if he had not emigrated to the UK, if I'm not mistaken, then perhaps we would have seen the two of you together playing for Kenya, right?
Yes, indeed. In fact, that has always been a discussion because he was also a very formidable cricket and a tennis player. But situation compelled him to migrate. I think it was in 1986 when he moved to England. So it's a debate that maybe time would have answered it, but unfortunately we did not get a chance to play together.
Yes, absolutely. It's an unturned stone. But speaking of family, Asif, I should take this opportunity to also put in a word about your son Irfan. And as far as all the clips I've seen of him in the documentary and on YouTube, he's a flamboyant wicketkeeper batsman, as far as I can tell. And so I just wanted to ask that with regards to your own, playing career as a left-arm spinner as well as a batter, maybe it's fair to say that your bowling was your superior strength. But seeing how well your son plays as a batter slash wicketkeeper, is there a tinge of regret with regards to maybe you could have done a bit more with your batting skills, or how do you look at it, or are you satisfied with what you've done as far as the batting is concerned?
No, that's a very good observation. In fact, my father was a formidable batsman. In his short career, he scored 18 centuries. So it's the blood. In fact, when I used to play club cricket, I was one of the main batsmen for the team every match. And as far as Kenyan cricket is concerned, I'm disappointed with myself because, yes, I could have by far contributed much more in batting also. But the environment and the situation also was not very conducive, and it's not worth going into those details now. But yes, I am disappointed with myself. I could have done much more in batting also.
Absolutely. And of course, I should also, take this opportunity to mention that, having that formidable top order and middle order, Kennedy Otieno, Steve Ticolo, Maurice Odumbe, at any time, I believe if there was a non-test playing 11 that the ICC had come up with, all three would have definitely had a chance to play for that particular team. So yes, that's also understandable. Okay, so two more questions, Asif Bhai. The next surprise guest question actually comes from Mr. Shumit Chakraborty. He is Sachin Tendulkar's biographer, and he's also the author of the book Master Luster, What They Don't Tell You About Sachin Tendulkar. And his question is that Kenya made it to the semifinals of the 2003 World Cup when they played against India. Now Kenyan cricket appears to be nowhere at the moment. What went wrong and how can it be revived? I believe we've already touched on this, Asif, but if there's anything else that you'd like to just add to this question, do please go ahead.
Well, I don't want to repeat all that, but what is the way forward? The way forward, in my view, would be is first of all for all the stakeholders to accept that we are on ground zero. It's important to accept it and believe that we are there, because I strongly believe we are there on ground zero. And then I think it's important to bring in good past administrators who did a good job, who understand what needs to be done, past players to share their experience, and people who love Kenya cricket, whether it's internally or externally, and to have a 2 or 3 day serious discussion to see how we can do what I would say damage control, if you want to use that word, and to see how we can revive the process again and again. If it is done correctly, I see a minimum of 8 to 10 years for us to really come back strong if we handle it correctly.
Right. Okay, absolutely. And of course, we wish all the best to Kenyan cricket in that revival process, and Godspeed to Kenyan cricket to get there as soon as possible. Okay, so the final guest question that we have for this episode, Asif bhai, is also somebody that you've had the pleasure of competing against, and his name is Tatenda Taibu, the ex-Zimbabwean captain, and he's also a friend of the show. He also recorded an episode with us, and he's also the author of the book Keeper of Faith. It's his autobiography. And Tatenda's question for you is, greetings, mate. The team that reached the semifinals of the 2003 World Cup, did you believe from the start that you had the potential to reach the semis? Or did you grow more and more confident only after you had won the first big game? So I think we touched on this as well, but do please go ahead, Asif, if you'd like to add something.
As I said, when we went into the tournament, we already were on the defense with the internal squabbles and problems that were having there. Having overcome that, the idea was to be competitive in that tournament, to do well in the tournament, because Kenya had already made a good name internationally. So it was paramount that we do well. And in the process, we were targeting 2 teams that we have a very good chance to win against. One was Canada, and the second one was Bangladesh. Obviously, because of the historical records between Bangladesh and Kenya. So those were the 2 teams that we had targeted that we would win. And if we win that and we were competitive in the rest of the matches and hopefully create an upset, because Kenyans are known for that, then the mission would have been done. But as I said, after beating Sri Lanka, the sense of belief grew so much that nothing was stopping us.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Asif bhai. So, we're done with the guest questions, Asif bhai. But just before we let you go, I have just 2 last questions. And as you know that we are, after all, a podcast about books. It's in the title. So we have some staple questions that we ask our guests about, specifically with regards to books. And so the first staple question that we have is, what genre of books do you enjoy reading? Are you more of a fiction person or a non-fiction person? So do please tell us about that.
Non-fiction.
Non-fiction? Okay. Anything in particular with regards to non-fiction, business books or biographies, autobiographies, memoirs? Could you go into specifics? Yeah.
Books. One of the books that I've enjoyed reading is Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Robert Kiyosaki, right?
So it's a good book to of course, being in the business world and being a businessman is quite an intriguing book. And the other book that I like reading is more on motivational, if you want to call it, is Tough Times Never Last, Tough People Do.
Okay.
Sure. So that's another book that I've enjoyed reading. And of course, there are several others, but I cannot remember all of them now.
Okay, no problem. We'll take your answer as it is. And I think you've mentioned some wonderful books which our audience would definitely do well to have a look in. Okay, so the second staple question that we have, Asif bhai, and let me just give a preamble and say that this is one question which happens to be one of my favorites, but our guests have all said that, Omar, this is way too tough a question, and so they always take a bit of time to answer it. But I'm sure that you'll be able to give us a good answer.
I'm taking a back seat. You can see I'm taking a back seat to take this question.
Okay. All right. So here we go with the question. The question is, if you could select a book that you feel that every young person should read at least once in their lifetime, it may or may not be related to business or to cricket, but if you could select something that was edifying or useful for a young person to read, what would be the name of that particular book? What would you select?
Well, there's an Islamic book called Nahjul Balagha by Imam Ali. That has tremendous sermons in there on various aspects of life, has various thought-provoking sayings, and I would strongly recommend that book to be next to your bed.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So, of course, as I mentioned that we are huge fans of history in the show as well as religious history. So yes, that particular book by Imam Ali, of course, we'll have it in the description so that our viewers and listeners can have a chance to go through it. Yes, thank you so much, Asif bhai, for that particular recommendation. So let me just conclude by saying that for our viewers and listeners who have been with us all this time, thank you very much for staying till the end. The book, once again, that we've been discussing today is The Karims, A Sporting Dynasty by Aasif Karim, and it's about him and his family, 3 generations, 2 sports. So definitely check out the book on Amazon as well as Google Play. Tell your friends and family members about it. Go out and buy the book. It's a fantastic book put together and written by a fantastic sporting family all the way from Kenya. So Asif bhai, my thanks to you as well, sir. You've been a wonderful guest, and I've really enjoyed talking to you and reminiscing about Kenyan cricket. And I really hope to have you back at some point for a future episode if and when you decide to write another book. And we also invite you back to Dhaka, to Bangladesh, whenever for to come and see how Bangladesh cricket has progressed, as well as to reconnect with all of your friends in Bangladesh. So thank you once again for your time.
Well, thank you also for inviting me for this podcast. You've been extremely passionate about this podcast that you have done, and you've had some tremendous interview, and I could see that the research that you did, you were very well prepared. You did good work on this matter, and I've really enjoyed this podcast. Thank you for the invitation to Bangladesh. It is always a pleasure. It is always something I always get excited whenever I do come to Bangladesh. And I'm hoping that somewhere along the line, I may get an opportunity to come back to the commentary box in the Bangladesh Premier League or in any of the Bangladesh series at home. It'll be a pleasure to come there.
Okay, wonderful. And if you
somewhere for the Bangladesh national team as a mentor or as a guide, it will be a great pleasure.
Absolutely. And I hope that anybody from the BCB who was watching or listening to that would know that Mr. Aasif Karim is available. And of course, to help coach or to act as a mentor. So Asif, I know that our cricketers will only benefit from your depth of experience and knowledge and wealth of knowledge. So yes, 100%, we would love to have you here in some capacity. And I really hope that this message goes far and wide to anybody who's watching and listening who's in a position of power and authority to do so and to make you that offer. So once again, Asif, thank you for your time. And I wish you all the best to you and to your whole family. And I really hope to catch up with you again soon, very soon.
All the very best to you and your family, and continue with the great work you're doing.
Thank you so much. Okay. Bye-bye. Bye for now. Have a good day.
Khuda Hafiz.